with technology first. Good evening, I'm Dean Lucinda Laird, and on behalf of all of us in the Cathedral, we're so glad you're here tonight, Cathedral members and people from all over the Convocation. I'd like to begin with a prayer. So, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, giver of every good gift, look graciously on your church, and so guide the minds of those who shall choose a bishop for this convocation, that we may receive a faithful pastor who will care for your people and equip us for our ministries. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
A special welcome, obviously, to our 4 candidates who will be introduced more officially shortly. So I would also like to say then a special welcome to Lynn, Judith, Jesse, and Sherry, the courageous and adventuresome spouses who are here tonight. And we're very glad to people wanted me to tell you, too, that they were so pleased that everybody turned out for the reception, and I want to thank the Junior Guild of the American Cathedral for that reception. We are grateful to them. And now I'd like to introduce Charlie Trueheart, who will be our moderator tonight. Charlie has done all kinds of interesting things in journalism. He's run the American Library, but his real claim to fame is, let's see, senior ward vestryman on the search committee, everything at the Cathedral. So, Charlie.
Thank you. Welcome to the Town Hall and a chance to hear from and to discern the potential of the 4 candidates for bishop in charge of the Convocation of Episcopal Churches in Europe, who you see before you. I think this is the time to recognize the search committee for their many months of work in selecting these outstanding priests for consideration. And of course, thanks to the 4 candidates for agreeing. And also special thanks today to the Transition Committee that's been hard at work seemingly forever and long before the finalists were chosen, preparing this day and other major events coming up in our common calendar, notably the installation of the new bishop on April 6, 2019. So special thanks to Janet Dave Strethlow, who's not here, who was behind the scenes organizing this day, and to Ann Swartzen, Harriet Riviere, and Nancy Janin for all they did to bring us all together today. And thanks to all of you for coming. I think if you've not before, you will experience today how connected the churches in Europe are and how close each is to the Mother Church and what the bishop does to hold it all together and lead us to great things. A few administrative details and ground rules before I introduce the candidates and we begin. They've each been given 4 questions, which they will answer one at a time in a round-robin fashion. So we'll start with 4 different questions for 4 different priests. And when we do that the first time, I will introduce them more fully. And then we'll shift the lineup 4 times so that by the end, everyone will have answered the 4 questions. We have a timekeeper, Sophie Bellaway. Thank you very much in the front row, keeping us in line. And after that, we will turn to your questions. You've found cards in the pews. They'll be collected later in the 4th round of questions. So you'll submit your questions in writing, and a group of transition committee members will be looking at them and handing me ones after checking for duplication or other unknown things that don't seem appropriate. One important instruction for the questions or guidance is that we'd like the questions to be addressed to just one candidate so that we would not get many questions in. So choose the person you would like the question addressed to, and if you don't, I will. So please take a moment to switch off your cell phones so we can avoid interruptions. And we'll begin with the first question. The contestants ready? All right. This question is addressed to Ben Shambaugh. Ben Shambaugh is the second from the right in front of you. He is the Dean of the Cathedral Church of St. Luke in Portland, Maine. His ministry has included living in and around New York, Chicago, Washington, Paris, Barbados, and the national parks, doing development work in Africa, Haiti, and an Indian reservation in the American West, and leading study tours to the Holy Land. He was ordained in 1988. He served 4 congregations and has had a variety of mission experiences, including time as a chaplain at the National Cathedral in Washington, as canon pastor at the American Cathedral in Paris, and in his current position as Dean of St. Luke's. He and his wife Sherry have 2 grown children, and in his free time he enjoys hiking, kayaking, and playing his tuba with the Maine Pops and other local bands. Ben, first question to you. After studying the convocation profile and other sources about the convocation, what would be, at this point, your vision for the convocation if you were elected?
Well, first of all, Messieurs, Mesdames, bonsoir. Good evening, and it is a delight to be with you. Before I answer the question, I just want to start and say thank you to the search committee, the transition committee, to Dean Laird, and everyone who's done such a good job to welcome all of us and our spouses. It is just a joy to be with you, and I know it's been a lot of work, and it is truly appreciated, so thank you. In Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 2, it says, "Write the vision, make it plain upon tablets so that a runner may read it." At General Convention this summer, several of you were there, Bishop Curry did just that. He did that by continuing his work of revisioning and rebranding the Episcopal Church as the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. And he encouraged us to do that by walking a way of love that connected us to the source of that love, which is Jesus. And his call is a call to get back to basics, to focus on a faith that is lived in real and concrete ways. You see, I believe that people are innately spiritual, and many are walking around with what you could call a God-shaped hole in their hearts. And I believe that with its combination of ancient worship and modern thought, with its inclusive welcome and commitment to justice, its respect for reason and science, the Episcopal Church can connect with people with God in a truly unique way. In our increasingly technological world, where tribal tensions and partisan politics tend to pull us apart, the connections, the communion and the community of the church, the Episcopal Church, is needed more than ever. Now, discerning what this means for the convocation is a process we would enter together. It would build on the work you've already done with strategic plan and all this in the bishop search. I see the convocation focusing on 3 core tasks. First, continuing to provide a home away for home for English-speaking expats. Second, reaching out and welcoming locals, often in their local language. And third, making special efforts to care for refugees and others in need. As you heard, I lived here before, and from my personal experience, I know how for those who live away from their families, the support of a church and the grounding of traditions and holidays and special events the church can offer here can be much more meaningful than it was at home. And for locals, congregations like ours can offer freedom to explore their faith in ways that can be more difficult in their own traditions. And for refugees, religion is a common language, and church is a place where they can find hope and comfort. Being in the Jesus movement implies moving beyond our denominational boundaries and combining our efforts with our ecumenical partners. Theologians today have said that God is at work in the neighborhood, and our job is to catch up. My vision is that the convocation would be a place where people can discover what it means to be part of the body of Christ in a post-Christian society, and in doing so catch up with what God is doing around them. You know, since I started this process, many people at home have wondered if a convocation of Episcopal churches in Europe, if having this convocation makes any difference. We are here today because we know it does. We have a unique opportunity to follow Habakkuk's lead to make that vision clear, and I look forward to the chance of doing that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben. The next question goes to Steve Polikas, who is on your left. Steve is the rector of All Saints Church, described as a diverse and growing parish in the Park Slope neighborhood of Brooklyn. He's worked with the people of his church to build a Christian community of welcome and uncompromising love for all, and parish worship attendance and membership have almost tripled since his arrival in June 2011. He's a member of the Board of Directors of the Episcopal Relief and Development, and the Board of Governors of the Episcopal Church at Yale, and facilitates the process of a discernment for holy orders on the Diocese of Long Island's Commission on Ministry. He and his husband, Jesse Lazar, were married at All Saints in 2014, and Steve is an amateur cellist. Steve, the question to you. How would you go about deepening the relationship and cooperation with our Church of England brothers and sisters in the Diocese of Europe, and with our other Anglican and full communion partners, including the Old Catholics?
Thank you very much, Charlie. And I want to echo Ben in thanking everyone here, the Transition Committee and the members of the Cathedral for your warm hospitality. Dean Laird, thank you for offering the booming voice of God from behind us here as we began this in your prayer. It is truly a delight to be here with you. The opportunity to expand ecumenical relationships is one of the unique things that drew me, and I'm quite certain all of us, to the possibility of this ministry. And it's a tremendous opportunity that's unique for a cleric in the Episcopal Church. And my experience of ecumenical relationships has led me to the conclusion that oftentimes they're based on two very practical things. First, a personal relationship, and second, a common mission between ecumenical groups. We know that there is one God, right, and one Jesus. And it is our job as people walking this faith to find common cause with one another. And I would look forward to working with Bishop Robert and Bishop David of the Diocese in Europe and the Church of England, and Archbishop Verkamen of the Old Catholics. I'd like to address another thing that maybe you might be wondering, which is what it would be like to lead ecumenical relations for the convocation as an openly gay man. And to be sure, this would be kind of uncharted territory, for as progressive as we as Episcopalians are, and as much as we have found a vocation to full ministry for all LGBT people in our church, there is only currently one active, openly LGBT bishop in the Episcopal Church, and I think if elected, I would be the fourth one in the entire Anglican Communion. But where that might seem like a challenge, I see actually a tremendous opportunity for the convocation to lead, not only in the Episcopal Church, but in the Anglican Communion as a whole. And as a gay person, you get pretty used to presupposing what people might think about you, what they might think about you when you walk into a church, when you lead a service for someone who doesn't know you. It's an experience that's probably quite similar to what it's like to be a woman in ministry or a person of color in different ministry situations. And you learn pretty quickly that you have to get pretty comfortable in your own skin. You also learn that once you actually forge a relationship with people, that their perspective on who you are and what you mean to the church can change. And because we have these different Anglican jurisdictions sitting on top of here in the convocation, we have this unique opportunity to expose leaders throughout the Anglican Communion to what it means to be an Anglican and openly gay bishop. Now, again, I don't really blame Anglicans and other parts of the communion or even other Episcopalians for not knowing what it's like to have an openly LGBT bishop, because, as I said, there are only 3 who have ever been ordained, so how could they possibly know? But it could be a unique mission opportunity for the convocation to provide this ministry not just to the churches of the convocation itself, but to the wider Anglican communion at large. And to me, that is real, true, and lasting ecumenical work.
Thanks very much. The third question goes to the Reverend Canon Paul Gordon Chandler, who's on your right. He is an Episcopal priest, author, interfaith advocate, and art curator. He grew up in Senegal, and he's lived and worked extensively in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe in leadership roles, including Christian publishing and ecumenical relief and development agencies. He's been the rector of 2 international churches, 10 years at St. John's Church Mahdi in Cairo, Egypt, and 3 years as a rector of the church in Tunis, Tunisia, rector of St. George Episcopal Church, the only English-speaking church in this Muslim-majority country. Paul Gordon is married to Lynn Chandler, and they have 2 grown children. And Paul Gordon, I must say that I wouldn't want to have this as my first question. Have you ever had a crisis of faith, or an incident or obstacle in your personal and professional life that felt like a failure? How did you learn from those experiences?
I have to say, when I saw that as my first question, I was like, oh, no. First of all, thank you for welcoming us so warmly here. We feel like VIPs. It's going to be very difficult to go back and be normal again in many ways. And the other thing I want to say about all this is that we actually like each other. And so you can call us the Episcopal Quartet. If your questions are not too challenging, we may sing for you at the end or something like that. On the question, I love the whole concept, first of all, I should say, of being on a pilgrimage. That we're all pilgrims, journeying in life and toward God, and not having arrived. So much of our faith teaches us that we arrive. And certainly that creedal emphasis of our faith breeds a sense of finality to it. There are borders on it. And I think it's actually much more accurate to call us a people of pilgrimage. We're all pilgrims, which means you're on the move, you're always journeying. And as a result, you're going through those valleys, you're going up the hills, ups and downs to get to that destination. And of course, I've had a lot of my own ups and downs. As to the ones that I'm revealing tonight, okay, one of the more difficult times for me of recent was in Cairo, in Egypt. We moved there in 2003. I was invited by the Egyptian bishop, sent out by the U.S. Episcopal Church as the only U.S. Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Egypt, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. It's the largest geographical diocese in the world. And we had a wonderful church there in Cairo, progressive, very all-embracing. It was a dream setting. About that time, the U.S. Episcopal Church made some decisions, as we all know, in 2003, that a lot of the Anglican communion didn't take too kindly to. So it happened to be, here I am in a diocese, actually, that completely and very quickly broke off all relationships with the Episcopal Church. And every week at the diocesan clergy meetings, and mind you, I know it's not like that in the convention, but we had them every week, okay, the Episcopal Church would be blasted, actually, as having left the faith, as having really gone astray. And it was very clear that they also felt that I had, and actually our congregation had. And so the challenge was significant in that regard. And instead of like you thinking, well, we'll normalize and it will slowly subside, it actually went the opposite way, where the actual diocesan bishop became one of the main leaders in the Global South movement, then completely ostracizing the Episcopal Church, and of course speaking out against them. So here I am caught in the middle of all this, and really it slowly, increasingly became for me what I would say is a dark night of the soul, because I felt trapped in this hostile environment. And I remember a group of Episcopal Cathedral deans coming over. Ben was on that trip. But after they saw it, they just very strongly encouraged me to leave. So I started exploring other opportunities, and it seemed wrong to leave because we loved the school. The kids were in, the kids loved it. We just moved the family there and all of that. Someone at that time strongly encouraged me to begin to look on all the positive that existed and just focus on that, as opposed to this overwhelming negative that we were feeling. Everything from the ministries at the church, at the diocese, serving the poorest of the poor, their interfaith work, and even the financial integrity of the bishop. And through it all, our church ended up actually supporting the diocese, making up the difference that they lost because they stopped receiving money from the Episcopal Church. And I ended up staying 10 years and not just able to maintain a relationship with the bishop, but really build a trusting friendship with the bishop. So much so that he sent me a WhatsApp yesterday saying, I'm praying for you being here, even though we had vast different theological issues. And so I'm reminded that I have zero time. Psalm 32, I will teach you and show you in the way you will go, and I will counsel you and watch over you. And it's a promise I fall back on all the time.
Thank you so much. Fourth question, of course, goes to Mark Eddington, who is second from left for you. He's the rector of St. John's, Newtonville, Massachusetts, and has extensive experience as a higher education executive, social entrepreneur, writer, and editor. He is the founding director of the Amherst College Press, and helped to create a 54-college consortium supporting an open access, peer-reviewed, scholarly press. He has served as senior executive officer of interdisciplinary research centers at Harvard, including the Center for the Study of World Religions and the Harvard Decision Science Laboratory. He's directed the publications program of an independent think tank focused on issues of international security and foreign policy, and he's been a consulting editor at Daedalus. His wife Judith is a lawyer in the tax department of Sullivan and Worcester in Boston. Mark Eddington.
I can read my question.
You want a question?
I can read it for you. Thanks, Charles.
The fourth is our churches and missions know relatively little about each other and relatively little about what their assessments go for, despite a fairly thriving set of convocation institutions on youth, discernment, and the like. How could you help the congregations understand the convocation better and also help them understand that service, including by clergy to the convocation and the Episcopal Church, enriches our life together?
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Search Committee. Thank you, everybody, for the amazing welcome you've shown to all of us and the wonderful process you have constructed. I join with my beloved colleagues in expressing my gratitude to you for all of this, and I also join with them in saying how blessed I know that I am to be in the good and gifted company of these three men. So thank you all for being here tonight. And good evening, church. So as I listen to this question, I think I hear two questions in it. One is about what do we know about the convocation and how it works? And the other is about what do we know about each other, about the churches in the convocation and what their ministries are, what God is calling them to do, and how they are responding to God's call. So I'll take the first question first. I think that question about the convocation, what it does with our funds, what it does with its life, a fairly thriving set of institutions that we may not fully understand, that's a transparency solution. The answer about that is, let's be clear about what we spend the money on. We were all given this morning a very wonderful, incredibly detailed budget. I have it here on my lap to tell us about all that the money goes to. But in my church, the way we'd approach that would be first to ask, what is it God is calling us to do? And I can tell you the answer for St. John's. It's worship, formation, education, stewardship, and service. So we look at our budget in those terms. How do we spend our money on worship? How do we spend our money on formation? How do we spend our money on communicating our message? And we can quickly see what our priorities are by how much we spend on those things. It's a fairly simple step to move from the incredible detail that you have into an intentional process of aligning our budget with our priorities, because ultimately that tells us what God is calling us to do and how we're responding. The second question is about what you know about each other. And I just need to tell you, you just asking that question tells us something about how different you are from most dioceses, right? Because I've never been in a diocese that said, gee, I wish I knew more about the other churches in our diocese. Instead, it's we need to know more about what the diocese is telling us we should do. All of the information comes from above to below. You're asking a question about what is the story that we have to share with each other? And the good news in this, brothers and sisters, is that as the Jesus community, we are gathered around telling a story. That's what we do every Sunday morning, is to retell a story. So we have to get better at telling our stories, first to each other, and then if we get good at that, we'll get good at telling our story to the rest of the world, even the rest of the world that is the Episcopal Church in the United States of America. Now, we live in a moment where we are flooded with messages and stories. So I would suggest that the convocation needs to intentionally identify, as part of its priorities, getting better at telling stories about the ministries that we serve, about the things we're being called to do in our various places, and sharing that story with each other first. Imagine that you would come into church every Sunday and get a little brochure that just tells you, here's what's going on at every other church in the convocation this week, this month, however frequently we could do it. The good news is we are a storytelling people. We need now to learn how to tell our story better for ourselves and then for the world.
Thank you. So second set that you've heard the questions, and I will repeat them, although in the last case I'll shorten them a little bit. The first question, the second set, goes to Steve Policus. And that question is, after studying the convocation profile and other sources, what would be, at this point, your vision for the convocation if you were elected?
Well, that's really the million-euro question, isn't it? Because the bishop is the person who is in the unique position to be able to discern how the Holy Spirit is moving through the convocation, and then articulate a vision that allows all of the various parishes, missions, and congregations and institutions of the convocation to rally around one common vision to help effective ministry in the entire body of the faithful here in Europe. And I have been, obviously, like my brothers here on the stage, thinking and praying about this for a very long time. The main thing I want you to know is that I think that God has some incredible things in store for the convocation in the coming years. I don't think any of us would be here if we didn't believe that very, very deeply. I've taken my inspiration from the objectives in your strategic plan. The first objective is for vibrant congregations, and the second one is for forming new communities of faith. In terms of vibrant congregations, I have experience as rector of my parish, as Charlie mentioned at the beginning of when he was reading off our bios, of going into a parish that was struggling, had some really difficult times. My two predecessors as rector had resigned or had been left under a dissolution of pastoral relationship. There had been lots of different types of malfeasance. Actually, when the bishop announced at Clergy Day that I was going to be the new priest in charge at All Saints, there was a line of priests at the coffee break urging me not to take it because it was a clergy killer in a horrible place. Fast forward 7 years, I like to think, are a flourishing, loving, diverse, amazing community where people's lives are changed. And it's a little bit disturbing to me sometimes when I hear this constant narrative of decline in the Episcopal Church. It seems to be that we get into this rut, that's the constant story that we're telling. And I'm here to tell you that it's possible to turn that story around. It really, really is. It's not a fantasy. We are people of faith, and we believe that ministry should be joyful and life-giving. And if we bring that to everything that we do, then our parishes, too, can become strong and vibrant. I have a passion for congregational development, as you can tell, and I would look forward to sharing that with the parishes and missions of this convocation. The second goal that you have is founding new communities. And this is something that is incredibly exciting to me, the prospect of offering the things that we have as Episcopalians to the people of this continent. We are in a unique position here as people of a radically inclusive and welcoming faith who also revere tradition, to give of the gifts that God has given to us back to the people of God on this continent. And we know that there are millions upon millions of people in this continent who are longing for a spiritual home that looks like what we have. The good news is that there are models of ministry that are being used across the Anglican Communion that we in the Convocation can experiment with and try. Everything from our traditional parish model to new monastic models that are being tested in the Church of England, to lay catechist models that are used in parts of the developing world. The Convocation can be a laboratory for ministry where we seek to see how the Holy Spirit is moving to create new communities of faith.
Thank you. Next question goes to Paul Gordon Chandler. It's the question, how would you go about deepening the relationship with our Church of England brothers and sisters in the Diocese of Europe and our other Anglican and other full communion partners?
Thank you. A lot of my background is actually related to the Church of England and some of our other partners in the Anglican Communion. It all started early for me. I actually went to a Church of England seminary and then was ordained with a number of those heading straight to work here in the Diocese of Europe, as well as with some old Catholic priests at the same time. Since then, I have to say, I've really benefited from a number of churches in the Diocese of Europe, both spiritually and also working programmatically with them. As to what it would mean to deepen, strengthen, and enhance the relationships with the Diocese of Europe and our other Anglican Communion partners, the Spanish Episcopal Reformed, the Lusitanian, the Church of England, the Church of Sweden, and the Old Catholic, I would think it very much means focusing on building the relationships with their leadership. Yes, at the higher level, the Council of Anglican Bishops in continental Europe, but also very much on the individual level, because my experience within ecumenical work is relationship is everything. I also think it's essential that we listen to them, where they see themselves at this period in their history, in their church's history, at this phase, as to their challenges, as to their hopes, as to their dreams, even down to specific ministry initiatives that they are planning or have currently going on. I believe it also means learning from our own lay leadership and ordained clergy at the local level as to what's working and what perhaps we can do better from their experiences. Additionally, I would say I would love Anglican Communion, our communion relationships, to have a grassroots impact. And for example, I would envision joint ministry initiatives where we're doing something together. For example, if we had a major touring art exhibition that would visit all of our churches in the course of 1 year, we would invite them in to participate wherever they exist and join together programmatically. The reverse could be true as well. For example, if we could come alongside some of their outreaches and programs. I think the Spanish Reformed Episcopal Church's Anglican Center in Santiago being a part of that. Another idea I think that would be very interesting is to have some kind of an exchange program where our local churches and theirs visit each other, and there's an educational component to it where we're learning about each other. This divine mosaic that we are. And last of all, I believe it's critical that we make sure there's not a sense of competition, but we're really focusing on being truly complementary. I mean, the Diocese of Egypt and North Africa includes the country, regionally at least, of Morocco. Morocco is also in the Diocese of Europe. So it's been a point of tension for years, and I remember hearing about this for a long time, and one of the ways they solved it was providing an Egyptian priest, a priest from the Diocese of Egypt, is the priest in the main church in Casablanca in Morocco, who's an Egyptian. So he works for the Diocese of Egypt, but it's an example of thinking differently and creatively as to how you can be complementary. So as the convocation grows and expands, and by the way, I would very much see that as being the future of the convocation, as starting new churches, for example, that it's essential that we do it in complementary ways, which means close cooperation and communication, and focusing on places where at all possible there isn't an Anglican communion present. But if we're really in communion, then let's find ways high and low, inside and out, to really commune.
Thank you. To you, Mark Annington, the question about a crisis of faith or an incident, an obstacle in your personal or professional life that felt like a failure, and what you learned from that experience.
So my parents could not agree on much, least of all religion. And one of the results of that for me was that I wasn't baptized until I came home one day and wondered why I hadn't been. And so I remember being baptized. I was 10 years old. That was the first moment of knowing that there was this thing that I was in relationship with and in conversation with that was going to have me in its hold for the rest of my life. And then 2 years later, I went to Bob Kessler's bar mitzvah. And I saw my young friend go to the front and be among his contemporaries and read from the Torah at the Bima. And then I got to go into the room where the dinner was and sit at the table with the whole softball team. And we got these little glasses with the plastic stems that stick in the base, you know, and they were filled with this stuff that they told us was champagne. And I just thought this was the best thing ever. And so I went to my rector and I said to him, you know, Jesus came to teach us that we should be in love with God. Why aren't we all Jewish? And he patiently listened to me, gave me a Snickers bar, and sent me on my way. Second crisis of faith. But here I am, I must have stuck with it for a while, and I wound up in an ordination process. And then, brothers and sisters, I will tell you that one of the most significant crises of faith for me involved a bishop. The bishop who made me a postulant, and before I was ordained took his own life as a suicide. That was hard. It was hard. And at that point, I learned that to keep moving forward, to hear this call and move toward it, I had to do a couple of things. I had to hold myself accountable to a group close to me of people who were trying to follow the same call. And I had to take on the discipline of staying with my practice, and my practice happens to be the liturgy of our church, even when the desert came. The dean I know recently preached about those people that say to you when you look like we do, oh, I know I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Man, yeah, I've heard that. And you know, once in a while I want to respond to those people saying, you know, that's funny, I'm religious, but not that spiritual. Because I am. I know that this routine, this way we have of ordering the hour on Sunday morning, the week, the seasons, the year, all of that is deeply helpful to me in moving forward. So part of it for me, how to address this, was give myself over to that practice. But I did two other things as well that I have found to be helpful. One is that I stay close in company with people in religious life. I'm an associate of the Society of St. Margaret in Duxbury, and I hang out a lot at the monastery in Cambridge, the Society of St. John the Evangelist, because I find people in religious life to have a clarity about their spirituality that is helpful to me in trying to have the same. Brother David Ryhoff, who's a dear friend, a man of Michigan, has this line that he gives us, I am a Christian because I cannot otherwise explain how good things are. And I'm a Christian because I cannot otherwise endure how bad things can be. And I align myself with that. I hear my own experience in that. The other thing I found to do is to stay close to the company of homeless people, because they too have a kind of clarity in their spirituality that comes from having none of the control that we have that allows us to imagine that we actually are in some way in control.
Thank you. The last question of the second set is
Well, the first thing I want to say, if this is one of your questions, is you're not alone. This sense of disconnection from the diocese has been a theme in every congregation and every diocese that I have served. Though I'm intimately involved in the day-to-day operations of the Diocese of Maine, I'm often surprised at the disconnect between the life cycles of the diocese and those of the congregations. I mean, for example, September is in parishes a time of things starting up. The beginning of Sunday school and stewardships get started and all of that, and yet diocesan staff and communications are often completely focused on diocesan convention. And though people in my cathedral are deeply connected to diocesan structures and the convention, they're also aware that our apportionment is the biggest in the diocese, and they sometimes wonder where all that money goes. So what can help? In the Diocese of Maine, we created what we call a narrative budget, a budget kind of like what Mark was describing, based on mission categories such as formation or youth, work in the community, advocacy, etc. And instead of defining mission programs or projects, we had parishes apply for mission grants. So we let parishes tell the diocese where to spend those funds. When I was in the Diocese of Washington, we had a consistent theme that mission happens in the parishes. And the diocesan staff did everything it could to highlight and support what was going on in the congregations rather than in the diocesan level. Other ideas include a regular bishop's blog or e-news focused again on kind of a similar theme on what's going on in the congregations. Maybe live streaming, using technology to share services or events. And having the bishop have a regular video check-in time with clergy. We use that technology in the bishop's search here, but imagine a weekly conversation with clergy, checking in on them and also having a conversation about the Sunday readings. Imagine also the possibility of having visitations, bishop visitations that last 2 Sundays in a row. The first being a regular visitation, the second being a time to give the clergy person a day off, and the time in between just hanging out and getting to know the people, the congregation, and the local community where they live. Now, programs are great, and they're lots of fun, but the best way to build connections is a personal touch. In Maine, all the churches are invited to bring their people to the cathedral for regional confirmations. When we did that last year, the nave was full with a huge group of youth and adults from around the diocese. And when I asked who had been at the cathedral before, every single youth raised their hands. They had been there again and again for diocesan youth events and other activities. They not only knew the cathedral, they knew each other. They knew me and they knew the bishop, and they had funny stories about both of us. They had a connection with the wider church that their parents did not have, but would have if they had spent time together. It's challenging over distance, but relationship is the key. And at St. Luke's Cathedral, these relationships, the impact of this was so great that when we did our last campaign, the cathedral donated 10%, more than $100,000, to the diocesan summer camp. And more than 2 years later, the diocese returned the favor and spent over $1 million on repairs to the cathedral's chapel. And more than this, a local rector who had always avoided diocesan work saw what we did, changed his mind, and became active in the diocese again. These things happened because the bishop and members of the congregations took time to get involved, get to know and care about one another. It worked there. It can also work here.
Thank you. Third round, third set of questions. This is to Paul Gordon, and it's the question, after studying the convocation information, what would be your vision for the convocation?
Well, obviously, any vision needs to be based on listening and learning and certainly building on what's gone before. My vision would be very simple, that the convocation thrive in depth and breadth, both at the local church level and at the regional level. I profoundly believe, as we all do, I know, as it's been mentioned, as to the potential in looking to the future for the convocation, enabling people behind it all to see and experience God and our faith in Christ in new and fresh ways. And I'd love to see the convocation actually lead the way as it looks to the future in re-energizing and re-envisioning the church. And ultimately, it would be marvelous if people were actually saying to themselves, wherever they are around the world, I've got to go to Europe, see what the Episcopal Church in Europe is doing, because I want to have that kind of success in our local context. So I'd love to see every church, established or mission, thriving, growing in depth and breadth, embodying the inclusive embrace of Christ, financially stable, gifted and caring clergy, trained laity, overflowing with volunteers, dynamic youth ministry, children's educational programs, serving the community, assisting the marginalized, and effectively building bridges with those of other Christian traditions, and certainly those of other faiths. And the list goes on, but all toward connecting people to God, regardless of their background, more directly with their Creator. I'd love to see all the convocation's church communities feel an integral part of a larger family and know that they're really and fully supported. I'd love to see the Episcopal Church in Europe lead the way in rethinking how we do and be church, toward discovering relevant and effective ways to communicate our faith, including to the non-churched and the younger generation. I'd love to see creative convocation-wide ministries that every church is involved in. I'd love to see the convocation itself financially supported by new income streams, such as foundations and major donors, perhaps, from the United States. I'd love to see where newly ordained clergy in the Episcopal Church from the U.S. and elsewhere, actually, are lining up to come to Europe. There's a waiting list to get here. I'd love to see the Episcopal Church of Europe be a cutting-edge example of effective interreligious peace building and doing it creatively with impact at the grassroots level, helping Europeans think differently toward their Muslim and Jewish communities. I'd love to see that when someone hears of the Episcopal Church in Europe, they immediately think, oh, that's that group that welcomes and serves the marginalized. I'd love to see the Episcopal Church in Europe be seen as a bridge church, a catalyst, bringing diverse Christian traditions together that may not normally come together at the local level and at the regional level. I'd love to see the Episcopal Church be a game changer, an influential game changer in Europe where governmental policies of social justice and environment are being set. And I'd love the Episcopal Church in Europe to have congregations, actually throughout Greater Europe, wherever there's a felt need that exists in international communities, almost like we have to continue to issue these press releases. Episcopal Church opens in Tbilisi and Montenegro and Bishkek, etc. The list goes on. And it's all quite simply based on my own experience with international churches as to what they can do and become in their own communities and context. Thank you.
Thanks. To Mark Eddington, a question about deepening the relationship and cooperation with the Church of England and with other Anglican and other foreign partners.
This is obviously a very important question for all of you, and it's a question that is more important here than really anywhere else, I think, in the Episcopal Church. I see it a little bit like a series of concentric circles, at the center of which is our relationship with the Church of England, where we have these overlapping jurisdictions here in Europe. I think we need to explore every opportunity we can find to serve together, to teach together, to do ministry together, to learn together, because the relationships that come from those experiences will be the bonds that allow us to grow more closely together. And I see that expanding into the broader circle of the other churches with which we are in relationship, the Old Catholics, the Swedish Lutheran Church, and the others that you know. Again, it is based ultimately on personal relationships that we need to find the possible. If we do the possible, then the impossible becomes possible. At the same time, though, I want to say, in all of this, it's important to me that we never lose sight of what makes the Episcopal Church distinct in the communion. This thing that we're doing here tonight together is one of those things. We are a democratically governed church. That is one of the most important ways that we hold ourselves accountable and our clergy accountable. And we want to make sure that distinctive quality about who we are and how we witness to God's love is upheld in these conversations. And at the same time, we've lived through, all of us are of an age that we've lived through a church that has fought about the role of women in the church, the full inclusion of gay and lesbian people in the church, and we have come to what I fully feel is the right outcome in each of those cases. We must stand clearly there, not loudly, not table-bangingly, patiently, lovingly, invitingly, but we must not fail to stand where we have arrived and forget that part of our identity. So, these relationships are very important here. We can set an example for collaboration and reconciliation, the power of reconciling love at work, binding the wounds of the church. You can do that here and send a message back to places where the church is pretty deeply broken right now. But to do it, we have to have integrity about standing clearly for what we have, what we believe, about the integrity, the inclusion, the radical love that all of God's people find in this church.
Ben Shambaugh, have you ever had a crisis of faith or an incident in your personal or professional life that felt like a failure, and what did you learn from that?
So about 10 years ago, the diocesan youth minister, a local school chaplain, and I were meeting, and we came up with a dream of beginning a young adult house, kind of part of that new monastic movement Steve was talking about. And we were going to put it in the cathedral deanery, old, currently vacant Victorian home that was owned by St. Luke's. And we called the place Emmaus House, based on the experience of the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And we recruited young adults, and off we went. And it started really well, but after 2 years, animosity increased between the congregation and the residents. The chaplain was burned out, and after considerable consternation over unpaid rent, the ministry closed. Now that failure came about because of several factors. First, the creation of the house was top-down, with little input or ownership from the congregation, which instead of being grateful for young adults as part of the congregation's mission, began to see them as ungrateful tenants, using up precious resources of the congregation itself. And secondly, while we set clear expectations for behaviors, such as paying rent on time and taking care of the building, we let them slide rather than holding people, including ourselves, accountable. And what was meant to be compassionate actually created tension and resentment on both sides. And the third problem was that rather than do this work in consultation with or as part of other Episcopal Young Adult Service Corps houses around the country, we decided to save some money and do it all on our own. And this disconnect from systems and support when we could have used them the most meant that we were really alone when things started to go bad. Now, I still believe in that vision. I think it was a great idea, but that was a ministry that failed. Now, an interesting contrast with that is, with the Emmaus House, is St. Elizabeth's Pantry, another diocesan ministry I helped bring to St. Luke's. This experience was very different. From the very beginning, St. Elizabeth's was supported not just by St. Luke's, but by 6 partner parishes and diocesan staff. It has established bylaws and a board, transparent finances and structures, and is owned by the congregation in a huge way. It comes up every time we have a town meeting or any time anybody talks about St. Luke's. And more than just the other churches, it partners with and receives support from a large number of other social service agencies from around town. So it has those structures, and while it hasn't been perfect, This Joel Mafuma-like ministry to refugees and those in need is grown to become a Jubilee Center that often sees more people on Tuesdays than we see in church on Sunday mornings. The difference comes from not doing it just from top down, but having congregational ownership and buy-in, from having good structures in place and following them and getting support where we need it. 3 days after the crucifixion, the disciples thought that everything was over. On the road to Emmaus, they met Jesus, and they realized that everything had just begun. The story of Emmaus House shows that the cycle of death and resurrection is not just part of our theology or our liturgical practice, it's part of our lives. We make mistakes. We fall down, and yet we are forgiven, given new life, and in the process, even despite our fears, are given the chance to meet the resurrected Lord, to stand up, and to start again. Thank you.
Thank you. And the question to Steve Politis is about the congregation. How would you help the congregations understand it better? And
Do I know? I'm making assumptions there, Charlie. Look, the mission of the convocation is the same as that of the parishes and missions of the convocation. It is to be the body of Christ in the world. We and the people who interact with us will know that we are fulfilling this mission when they see that we are loving God and one another. That's the way it works. It works on all levels of church governance. And if that's not what we're doing, we might as well just chuck the whole thing and go home. Your question to me speaks to, it's very honest, and I appreciate the way that you've been honest about the ways that you are desiring to know and love one another more fully. It also teaches me a little bit about where you are now and where the Spirit might be guiding you to get to the place where you want to be. This question echoes some of the conversations I've had over the last couple months with folks and right here since we've been in Paris. And it's a theme of a needs-based perspective on ministry. I've heard a lot of things about what the convocation doesn't have. Not enough money, not enough people, not enough clergy who are able to meet with each other often enough. And the thing is that as tempting as it is to follow that narrative, it can really become a downer after a certain point, can it? I'm lucky, as Charlie mentioned, to serve on the board of Episcopal Relief and Development. So there's my little plug. I know the convocation worked with Episcopal Relief and Development during the refugee crisis. And Episcopal Relief and Development practices a methodology called asset-based community development. An asset-based approach doesn't look at what you don't have. It looks at what you do have. It's the gifts that God has given you and is inspiring you to share with the world. So I would encourage the convocation to look at what it already has, what you have in your parishes and missions, what you have as a convocation as a whole. I would also say that this is a problem that besets almost every diocese of the Episcopal Church. The nearest parish to me is a 10-minute walk away, and yet I rarely get to see the rector. I love her. We're very tight, but life intervenes. I've noticed that in dioceses, I think there are three primary things that can bring people together, three assets. Those are prayer, mission, and fellowship. Those three things will be the things that I think the next bishop should focus on, creating as many opportunities as possible for the people of the convocation to enjoy. I want to give you a very brief example. I pray the daily office. Actually, the last couple months I've been praying it in French in anticipation of this. And when I travel, I don't take my prayer book with me, I use my phone. Most of my life's on my phone. And I have this little app that I use, and God bless the people who made the app. It's great, I'm thankful it's there. But you just kind of open it up, and if you haven't been to seminary for 6 years, if you're not an expert in the daily office, it's a little bit difficult to use. And I wonder if the convocation couldn't take some of the challenges and flip them over into assets. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to have an app that reflected the beauty of Anglican worship, that was multilingual, that was connected and networked, so you could have your profile on it and see where your friends on the other side of the continent were praying daily prayer. This is the type of creative and ingenuitive thinking that I know the people of the Convocation are capable of doing to increase and let the assets that you already have shine through.
Thanks. Before we go into the fourth set of questions, I was asked to remind you that the members of the committee will be picking up the cards and questions we will turn to after this next set. This question to Mark Eddington is the vision thing.
The vision thing.
So this for me is going to be the hardest one to answer in the 4 minutes I'm given, though I might speak a little bit fast. I'm going to answer this question in a few ways, in layers basically, because when we talk about vision for the Convocation, you're the Convocation of churches. So we're talking about the church, the Convocation, the bishop and the bishop's role, and then the churches. And for me, that is increasing order of significance, okay? The thing about the church is we are moving into a period of our history when our struggle is going to be as between deciding, are we an institution or are we a mission? And that will be a painful conversation sometimes, because there will be moments in which the love we have for the institution gets in the way of enacting the mission that God is calling us into. And we'll have to find ourselves letting go of some of the things that we've inherited in order to grasp the call that God is giving us. The Convocation, I see you as the research and development arm of the Episcopal Church. You live in a place that is very secular, that is intensely multi-ethnic, that in which to be a person of faith you have to be in intentional conversation with people of other faiths. You are already living in the culture that the United States will be coming into in 40 or 50 years, and frankly doesn't yet know it. You are the place figuring out how to be the church in the future. And blessings on you, you have a very thin organizational layer in the Convocation. You do not have the hierarchy of most dioceses, which is now getting in the way of mission in many places. You don't have that. It's a blessing. And it enables you to have light and space and the Spirit in your lives together to invent and to create and to do things new. The role of the bishop. We have an incarnational theology. The bishop should have an incarnational style of leadership. And what that means for me is living alongside the communities that make up who we are and what we do. Listening for a year to the call you hear, God inviting you into in every one of the places that we're at, and remembering that we need to be in places like Chemnitz. We need to be in places like Poland. We need to be in places where anti-Semitism is on the rise, intolerance is on the rise, all of the things that we all know that we witness against when we proclaim God's radical love for all people. So the leadership of the bishop, I think, needs to be a leadership that values, this is a phrase from my Kennedy School days, non-positional leadership. Look for the people who have the gifts, who are flourishing in the places where they are, and invite them in to take a leadership role in our church, in our convocation, in our lives together as Christians. Most important for my vision for the convocation, my brothers have said it as well, our congregations must thrive and flourish for us to have anything to represent to the world. So I feel that my own vision for the role of the bishop and the role of the convocation is to find the places that are flourishing, help that message get shared around the whole community so that we can all benefit from it, come to the aid of those who are suffering and struggling and really trying to find a path forward. But most importantly, it's wonderful to be in the high and lofty places of ecumenical and interfaith conversation. All of that is great, and it's a privilege that all of us are drawn to. But our congregations must flourish and thrive on the street corners and the communities that they serve. And they must witness to God's radical love to all people. And then we will all flourish.
Thank you. Then Jean-Paul, a question about what do we do to deepen the relationship with the churches
Well, so here I want to go back to Jesus' prayer in John 17, that they may all be one. And I want to say that I admire and give thanks for the wonderful work of Bishop Jeffrey, of Bishop Pierre, and of so many of you already in this area. The reality is that we're small in number, and the best way of fulfilling our mission is to do that together. And the best way of doing that is to build relationships first. It's a theme that we've heard a lot tonight. So much of what I've accomplished in the city of Portland, in the state of Maine, has come as a result of ecumenical and interfaith friendships and partnerships. And all that we did started because clergy committed to meet regularly together, that to check in and support one another and create community first. And out of our conversations came shared Thanksgiving services, ashes to go, foot washing of the homeless on Maundy Thursday, and a combined vigil on Easter Eve. And our collaboration literally changed the way the city cares for the homeless. It helped win the fight for marriage equality, and it empowered parishioners to stand up for immigrants and refugees. And though national and local organizations were involved, what happened grew out of grassroots, person-to-person connections on a local level. And I would strive to deepen relationships with our Church of England brothers and sisters, the Old Catholics and others, by building community, by getting together and getting to know one another. And most importantly, building on your point, Mark, I would encourage the same thing to happen with clergy and congregations on a local level. I have 3 decades of experience working with Anglicans and other partners in full communion with the Episcopal Church. As a seminarian, I lived and worked in the province of the West Indies, and through my church in Maryland, spent 12 years corresponding back and forth with Anglican bishops and development officers throughout East Africa. And this was a time when the Diocese of Washington was very progressive on issues like sexuality, and the Africans weren't, and we unified ourselves over mission, over caring for God's people together. And when I got to Maine, we did a lot with Lutherans, and we have Episcopal clergy serving Lutheran congregations, Lutheran clergy serving Episcopal congregations, and congregations that are both. They use the word Lut-Pisc, which doesn't make much sense. And when I was here at the American Cathedral, I was deeply involved ecumenically. I had close relationships with the Anglican congregations in town and the American Church across the river. I helped start a service in French led by Old Catholic clergy and supported the ordination of a Chinese priest and the beginning of a Taiwanese mission here. I came to Paris in the first place because of knowing the Anglican chaplain in Venice. As I said, we are small in number, but the best way of filling our mission is to do it together. And these kind of relationships are the place to start. Bishop Whalen has done a wonderful job on a judicatory level, working up here. And I would hope to continue that work, but also strive to encourage it, develop it on a local, on a ground level as well.
Thanks. Steve Pollock, have you ever had a crisis of faith or an incident of failure?
No, Charlie. Thank you. Yes. Actually, I decided to do some research on this question. I asked my parishioners what they thought my greatest personal faults were, and I asked Jesse, and we could stay here for hours if you wanted to. Actually, the question really forced me to do some deep digging, not because I think I'm without fault, actually quite the opposite. I'm a very self-critical person. And it caused me to think about what success and failure mean in a Christian context. As I say, I'm a naturally self-critical person, and when I dug deeper into my faith, all my notions of what was success and what was failure were completely turned upside down. We worship a Lord who was crucified on the cross and who rose on the 3rd day. And what that means in terms of success in the real world is a complete revolution for the way that we live our lives. That's at the heart of our faith, and it's at the heart of what we preach in the gospel to a world that is absolutely obsessed with success in monetary and secular terms. And all this is not a way of avoiding a question that is causing me to be vulnerable. It's simply to say that the notions of what success and failure are, I think, one of the most preachable moments that we as the church have. Now, with all that in mind, I did want to share with you something that happened to me when I was a hospital chaplain. All priests in the Episcopal Church have to go through a program called Clinical Pastoral Education, where for a summer we serve usually in a healthcare setting. I served actually in a hospital in suburban Detroit where I was born, on the same unit where I was born. It was a medical unit. And it was a profoundly transformative moment in my life, way back in seminary, early during my formation. And one day, my shift was ending, and one of the nurses came up to me and told me that one of the patients on the unit was requesting communion. Now, I'd already stayed 10 or 15 minutes longer than I was supposed to, and this would mean that I have to go way back to the office, get the communion kit, come back, sit and talk to the person. And I was experimenting with boundaries. Clergy know about this, experimenting with boundaries. And so I said, no, my boundary is that my shift has ended and this is my time to go home. I'll simply come back and visit the man in the morning. When I came back the next morning, communion kit in hand, I went to the room and found that it was empty and the man had passed away over the evening. So here I had deprived this person of his final chance to receive the sacrament, of the pastoral care of someone who was bringing the love of Christ to him in the most vulnerable moment of his entire life. And I was depriving myself as a pastor of the opportunity to see God at work in a time of profound transition for this person and for his family as well. And it taught me a lesson I will never forget. I'm still experimenting with boundaries, believe me, but they're a little bit different now. I think I have worked really hard to be able to discern when the Holy Spirit is moving and when I, as a pastor and a priest, am being called to immediate ministry. It's forced me to think about what priorities I have as a minister and to put the most important things first and let everything else sort of sort itself out. My example for this is Jesus, who always put the most important things first. And the more time that goes on, the more humbled I am about being a cleric in the church and handling these things of ultimate importance.
And finally, the question about the convocation. How important, how would you help them understand the convocation better and enrich our life together through the church and the convocation?
I think this is this on? Didn't sound like it's on. Is it on? Now it is, yeah. I think this is a critically important area because the starting point is different in a context like this. One doesn't have the same assumptions as a traditional U.S. diocese, for that matter, or as for a lot of dioceses in the Anglican community. Because the majority often in our churches are not Episcopalian or having Episcopal roots. When serving as the rector of the Episcopal churches in Cairo and Tunis, most were not from Episcopal background. I think Tunis was less than a fourth, and certainly Cairo was less than a third. So they had no understanding of the Episcopal Church and had no concept of a bishop, let alone an understanding of even the Episcopal Church when they walked into the door for the first time. Many had not even seen the need, of course, in that time for a bishop. And we had everything from Catholic to Orthodox to Presbyterian to Southern Baptist. I remember the bishop's first visit to Tunisia. He came down the aisle with his mitre and his robe and his staff, and the Southern Baptist on the vestry literally freaked out. He had never seen anything like this before. He had no idea what was going on. In short, we were able actually to move in those churches people from other church backgrounds from begrudgingly giving the assessment to actually as being leaders that established creative initiatives that would raise funds for the ministries in the diocese serving the poorest of the poor because they saw them as truly transformational. It's absolutely critical, I think, though, that individuals see and experience, not just hear about, the added value of the convocation. And that added value to me has to be spiritual and practical. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to see the local church's ministry vision so beautifully interwoven with the convocation's ministry vision. Most of the ministry roles I've had in the past that have not been in parishes have been leading these kind of multicultural networks of churches and ministries and coming alongside them and helping them thrive, even though they were autonomous, but at the same time, in many ways, working on a shared vision. So I would see the success of the convocation is directly related to the success and health of the local churches. And in that regard, it seems to me, more than anything else, a commitment to the ministry of presence is needed. Being with the churches, spending time with them, getting to know them, providing spiritual inspiration and encouragement and casting vision, but where they really sense that the bishop and the convocation are coming alongside them to thrive. And of course, in being with the churches close up, one really sees much more clearly what the true practical needs are. And the areas that stand out for me in resourcing the churches are obviously leadership development, from helping recruiting and training and resourcing lay leadership, to financial development. And by the way, I want to say one thing. I love that old definition of a bishop as a pastor to the pastors. And so that the people in the congregation see that value in the relationship between their clergy and the bishop. But financial development, helping them think differently and creatively about alternative income generation. And being a resource for interfaith and ecumenical outreach and the marginalized at the local church level. It's an area where I spend a lot of my time right now, is coming alongside cathedrals and churches and helping them think creatively about interfaith outreach. And for example, you could have a joint touring interfaith art exhibition that goes to every church in the course of a year. And the convocation helps those churches develop really creative, unique programs around that exhibition that create further interfaith understanding. Underlying all of this, you need great communication. And by the way, not just cutting edge, but making it interesting. And you need developing an exchange of expertise and gifts. And more than anything else, I would say, it's enhancing community, building those connections, that we're all in this together.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We're going to take a 5-minute leg stretching moment and resume with the questions that have come from the floor.
Stretching my legs.
Thanks, Sophie, for not turning off the microphone at the time.
What do you mean?